Hey everyone, so I was hoping to get this out much sooner. However, life being life and traveling at the end of last month has me doing this on June 2nd. So I was even hoping to have it earlier today, but let's just get into it. So I will mention something that I wanted to talk about for June 1st that we see over here because it's still going on. So we have Jupiter conjunct the North Node. And we'll be feeling this for a little while, so not too long, but we will be feeling this for a little bit at least. So we were feeling that yesterday into today, and a couple things that I want to mention. Like, this could feel like an abundance of optimism, especially around like what you're creating, thinking about Taurus, like what you're materializing and working to create like physically in this world. But it could also be about overindulgence of some of the earthly delights, right? Because Taurus is also about like those earthly pleasures, like good drink, good food, good, good all the things. And it can be a bit hedonistic, which is lovely, but done in excess, that can be a bit much, because we're looking at, the North Node is just kind of like, you could think about a hungry ghost. It's just hungry for more, has a voracious appetite. And so it has this kind of magnification quality that's really like similar in a way, not the same, but similar in a way to Jupiter, and Jupiter having that magnifying kind of presence as well. So just a couple things that I wanted to mention with that. And also, with this, I can't really help but mention self-worth, because Taurus is definitely associated with that whole piece around self-worth. And because of Jupiter having to do with our beliefs and our ideals, but especially our beliefs, right? Like faith and beliefs and things like that are also associated with Jupiter. I feel like this could be something where we can't really ignore what is coming up around our beliefs in self-worth with wherever Taurus is located in your chart. So for instance, even though this is a chart about the transits, it's not anybody's personal chart. Let's say this was someone's personal chart and we see that Taurus is occupying the seventh house. Well, the seventh house has to do with relationships. So I could see this bringing up somebody's beliefs around their personal self-worth in relationships, either in relationships or having a relationship, or that whole relating piece, right? So just wanted to kind of point that out. If you're having some of those feels, I know that there are a couple of friends of mine who were definitely feeling that, and so we were kind of talking about that yesterday as well. So I wanted to mention it because I thought it was worth mentioning. So let's go back and take a look at here. Besides what we've got going on here, this chart is about June 2nd primarily, and what I really wanted to show is this grand trine that we have going on here. So with Neptune and Venus and the moon. So this is a water trine. Definitely the vibes are water, right? And we can think about like water, emotion. It can be really like feel good. It can be all these kinds of things. The first impression of this that I have is it kind of feels like we're getting like a gifted dose of heart opening, heart softening goodness. Kind of like, for those of you who are familiar with mushroom journeys or microdosing in that way, like with that particular substance, it can feel like this heart opening, softening kind of place. And this is kind of the initial vibe that I get hit with when I look at this. And I feel like it's kind of here to counterbalance some of the remains of that T-square that we were talking about in my last video from the end of May that was between, Mars and Pluto and Jupiter, right? And so that whole intense kind of pressurized feeling that I know a lot of people were talking to me about feeling towards the end of the month. I was also kind of just feeling some of the intensity of that too from the end of May. So coming into this particular day, I just feel like this is a really lovely kind of little gift out of time that we get, from whoever you want to call it, the universe, the cosmos, whatever, right? So and I also just want to mention, I think that because of the moon being in Scorpio, we can kind of get this sense of being able to feel into something more deeply, because of the depth that Scorpio really brings. It can also bring intensity, yes, but I think that intensity is balanced out by the benefic Venus over here, and also by this having a Neptune in its home sign of Pisces, right? So, and it feels good there. So it's happy there, right? So I think that this can definitely be about us being able to feel more deeply into maybe even some of the things that do normally feel intense, but are not quite as intense with these other aspects with it, which is, I think, maybe why it reminds me of mushroom experiences, just because when I've had those, it feels like I can get I can face some things that feel more challenging or intense to normally face, but it feels like there's a softening around it, so I can really accept it or be with it or feel into it more clearly. So, and not to give a ton of those, for anybody who doesn't really, get into mushrooms or microdosing, hopefully it's not offensive for you, but it really feels like a very clear experience with that. So I also wanted to bring up, like, what are we feeling into, right? We're feeling into what we value, right? Like what feels nourishing and nurturing inside of like what we value. Also, we would probably be feeling like what feels good to us on an emotional and spiritual level, again, because we're looking at Pisces and feeling into that sense of spirituality and like that kind of all oneness kind of spirituality that we get with Neptune. So it's just like a lot of love and oneness. I mean, just even if we only had a trine between Venus and Neptune here, that would be such a loving, accepting, like all kinds of loving, accepting, ushy-gushy feels. So it's a really lovely kind of feeling. So you might ask yourself, like, what feels soulful and nurturing and good to me, right? And just kind of moving in that direction. So it could be a really good, like I said, day or evening for like microdosing or medicine or, meditation, but just not getting lost is my main thing that I wanted to make sure to mention. So I just really think this is lovely, right? Just having the Cancerian feels, that kind of like, Venus in Cancer. Some of my experience while it's been in Cancer has just been feeling like self-care and nourishment for myself goes more to the top of the list. It's like, okay, well, what nourishes and massages my values and just kind of my Venus nature, right? So I hope that makes sense. Like I say something like Venus nature and people are probably like, what the hell is she talking about? So, but I don't want to go into like too long of an explanation because it's already going to be a long video. We're going to be covering a lot. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about June 2nd. So let's get into the next one. Okay, so here we are on June 3rd and we are talking about the full moon. So it's the full moon in Sagittarius and the sun is in Gemini. And why I'm pointing that out is because these are mutable signs. And I think it plays into how I'm feeling about how this moon is going to play out for a lot of us, right? It can feel really, I think, fun and energetic. Obviously, depending on what's going on in your individual charts, but with the moon in this light trine also to Mars that we see happening over here in Leo. And just that Mars in Leo plus the full moon and these mutable signs, I think it can add up to feeling kind of like fiery and flirty and playful and maybe desirous, maybe even libidinous energy. Like, why not? I think that could be also a part of it. So, but it is a light trine. It's not exact. It is a few degrees, but it is a light trine that's there. And I also think that energy, like that kind of playing out, could potentially be even a little bit healing, just because of, again, that light trine. It's within 5 degrees to Chiron in Aries here. And, just because of that Chiron kind of healing element and because of how playful everything else is, I feel like this could have the potential to, like I said, just like have fun, be playful, I wouldn't say like because of the mutable energy, I wouldn't expect all of your plans to go like according to plan with all of this mutable energy. Like it doesn't feel hard. Just maybe a little disruptive, not disruptive in a bad way, but just like a little disruptive to the plan or the time frame that you have in mind for certain things going down the way that you think that they're supposed to go down. So maybe even a bit all over the place, right? You think about like the social energy and the fun, light energy of Gemini and the sun that we typically get, that we haven't really had a ton of so far in this season. And then we have, the moon in Sagittarius, right? And just like Sagittarius feeling like optimistic and gregarious and adventurous and explorative and, having that fiery, playful and flirty energy as well. So we have a bunch of flirty energy, and I just see the potential for this to be, I don't know, it could be a lot of fun. I mean, obviously there are other things that are happening in the astrology that kind of might slow that down a bit, but, for instance, we have, just this Mercury and Uranus starting to become conjunct. They're like 1 degree away from becoming fully conjunct, but that leading up to an exact aspect is when we can tend to kind of like feel that energy more, or see that the themes play out, because it can feel a little bit more pressurized, or we start to like really feel the impact of it. And so with that kind of present, who knows, it could be even a little bit more all over the place, because Mercury is fast moving energy and Uranus is like that also very fast moving electric kind of energy. But I'm going to talk about that more in the next slide when we're talking more about like these energies together. But just kind of adding that into this whole picture, I could see this being very fast paced, very maybe a little bit all over the place, maybe kind of scattered. Just try not to like sit back and enjoy the ride. Try not to get frustrated if things just don't go totally according to plan. But I think it has potential, and I'm curious to see how this particular Saturday night plays out. Okay, so here we are on June 4th, and this is where we have Mercury and Uranus exactly conjunct, right? And it's a little bit after midday on the Pacific like time on the West Coast, so adjust for wherever you are. But like I was saying, this energy is very like fast moving, right? So we could see some like swift, sudden communication or even transactions, because, people sometimes forget Mercury is also about commerce. So it's a potential for maybe that to happen more quickly, but also sudden and surprising messages or conversations coming through. So you might have that come up in, just kind of like left field conversations, or news that you get that's kind of left field, like you weren't really expecting it, or it seems really sudden, or like something's happening much more quickly than you anticipated or maybe even wanted. There is a possibility with these two together, because it's like, think of just like this really fast moving frictiony kind of energy that can cause a little bit of anxiety, right? Because, this actually Uranus actually rules like the nervous system a bit. It affects the nervous system, and, Mercury is the mind. And so we could have this nervousness or this feeling of anxiety, or like a lot of energy in our mind or our body. But then again, it is in Taurus, so I'm kind of hoping that will maybe help slow or ground this, and it won't be as intense as that. Overall, I don't see that it's necessarily a negative aspect, but I could see it going in either direction, right? So you just want to watch your mental health, like your state of mind during this particular day. Maybe watch like your communication. So just pause a second, think before you speak if you can, with your communications, because you might just kind of find yourself like foot in mouth sometimes from speaking too quickly, or maybe this reminds me of just having your thoughts moving so quickly that you can't maybe get it out of your mind to your mouth quickly enough in a way that is like tactful, because it's just kind of coming out, right? It just all spills out. Or like when you're writing in a journal and you're not able to write as fast as your thoughts are coming, and your hand starts cramping, like that kind of energy. So just wanted to bring that up really quickly. I don't necessarily see this as like quote unquote not great, but it has the potential to also just be really interesting. So I'd say just be open and aware, and maybe expect the unexpected a little bit. Okay, so June 5th, we have Venus ingressing into a new sign. It's coming into Leo. And one would think that with Venus coming into Leo, while Mars is also hanging out there, that this could just feel like that feel-good, fun, flirty, playful, flirtatious, passionate kind of energy, right? And I would say maybe it would be that if it weren't for some other things, like she's immediately, as soon as she comes into Leo, she's immediately opposing Pluto. So, wah wah. But she immediately comes in and squares Pluto. And this can bring up some pretty intense feelings. You got to think about Venus in her feels. I just want to erase that really quickly because I didn't realize I was like right in Venus's face there. So Venus, you think about like, okay, yes, it's our desires, our creativity, it's our desire to be related in a harmonious way and to be connected, right? And most of the time we're talking about this from a position of talking about romantic connections and love, but it can also just be our really close connections. But yes, obviously can have to do with romantic kinds of connections. And so when you add in some of the dynamics of Pluto, and while Pluto does have beneficial, intentions as well as shadowy intentions, we're talking about an opposition, and in this opposition, it's often like relational. So it often has to do with dynamics of like these connections that we have with people, not necessarily what's happening in the outside world. So, and with Pluto in this kind of uncomfortable type of aspect, it can bring out some of the more shadowy aspects. So we might feel like, as an example, obsessive about our desires to be connected, or might feel kind of like this power dynamic happening that feels uncomfortable, similar to power struggles, but I don't know if I would call it power struggles, but just wanting to relate more, maybe wanting to control that out of a need to feel safe perhaps, or just because it feels so intense. But imagine the intensity of feeling like some of the desire that can really come up with Venus, and then Pluto adding like that intensity, and adding like this, Pluto has on a shadowy side an obsessive kind of quality. It also has this like really intense power quality, and it has to do with those power dynamics. And so, and sometimes control, sometimes manipulation. You add these two together in a way where they're clashing and they're going toe to toe, and you can imagine that might create a lot of energy and a lot of intensity. And so we might feel really impulsive, like the need to act out our feelings, right? The need to just like do something about it. And so I want to mention this because I think it's important to slow our roll, just like maybe mark your calendar for this day and kind of go, okay, today I might notice that I'm feeling intense feelings that I need to take action on, like it must happen. And you might want to just kind of feel your feelings through, process it with a friend first before you make that call, before you communicate that thing, before you do that thing, whatever it is. I just wanted to kind of put that out there because I thought it would be helpful, and why else would I be doing this if I didn't want it to be helpful, right? So we also notice that as soon as she moves in, not only does she move into immediately oppose Pluto, but she moves into like where Mars was. Remember, Mars was in this position in the latter part of May, and was creating that T-square up there with Jupiter, right? And so that it's not an exact square. You can see that the degrees are not exact. So that is like this, it's exact with Pluto, but it's like it's already 4 degrees. It's not exact, but it's within range where I would say it's probably going to bring up some similar feels and themes that we were experiencing, because, there are some similarities between Mars and Venus, even though, they have definite differences. But in terms of desire, in terms of, that wanting, that can really, I think, be maybe problematic for some people. So I just wanted to bring that up as well, that we might be feeling that magnification on a couple of different levels, not just with the opposition, but because of the position that she's in, right? And the other thing too about this is that we're not quite there. I'm going to talk about this more in the next video where I talk about the latter half of June. But we're not quite there yet, but we're building towards a Venus retrograde. Venus doesn't go retrograde until July. I think it's July 22nd. I need to remember these dates just off the top of my head, but I believe it's the 22nd of July. But before that, we will get a preview of what that 40 days and 40 nights of Venus retrograde is going to be around, right? And remember that retrogrades are revisiting and reviewing, and they all have a different purpose. Like with Mercury, it's reviewing and revisiting and revising certain things, right? But we think about Venus and what that's going to bring up. So again, I'll be talking about that a lot more in the next video, because we're not moving into that shadow period until later on this month. But I just thought it was worth bringing up to say, like, hey, some of these feelings, like some of the things that might be coming up now might be some of the things that we start to see in the preview. Maybe not, but I think it's worth mentioning, and just to say, like, again, I'll talk about this more in the next video, but I have experienced the Venus retrogrades, being aware of them because I've followed certain astrologers for years. And, there are some times when I've experienced Venus retrogrades more than others. I've had the intense kind of Venus retrograde where it's been more challenging, and other times where it really hasn't been that challenging. I was like, whew, lucky, right? But I think a lot of that depends on what else is going on in your natal chart. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention, like, I can definitely feel that. It's definitely felt for me, at least. So it'll be interesting to see now that I'm in this position where I'm now, I've been studying for over a year and a half with a teacher, and I'm starting to put my own stuff out and starting to notice it from different perspectives, and really interested to see how this goes for more people. The last thing I really want to say about this is that we have Venus and Mars are in the same sign. So I really I heard another astrologer talking about this for this month, and they were talking about how, like, they're kind of cohabitating in the same apartment. Like they're hanging out in the same apartment, but they're not, like, in the same, bed together, essentially. And I think that's actually pretty fitting because, I've heard over the years, and I feel like when I've looked back at my own history, like, this energy has definitely seemed very apparent, but it kind of feels like cat mouse kind of energy, and cat and mouse energy can feel like, it can feel like a game. It can feel, not playing games, but like a game. It can feel like playful and delicious and like interesting and exciting. And on the other end, it can feel really frustrating, similar to like sexual frustration, but it can feel just really frustrating or elusive. So like Venus, like I said, she's about to be going retrograde. So that means she's going to be like slowing way down. But as we go through the next couple slides, you'll see that these degrees are going to get closer to each other. They'll, like, Mars will progress and she'll progress and look like she's catching up, and then it'll progress a little bit more, and then she'll look like she's catching up, and then she slows down and she just never really totally catches up with them. So, again, I could see this being something that, depending on what your personal situation is, what's going on in your life, like I said, it could feel really exciting, but it could also feel extremely frustrating. So I just wanted to bring that up. So we'll be talking about this more. We'll be talking about Venus and Leo and the retrograde and all the stuff for a while, but I just wanted to mention all of these. So let's get on to the next. Okay, so this is one I wasn't really sure I wanted to bring in, so I'm just going to run through it really, really quickly because look at how early that's happening. And that's happening on, West Coast at 1:46 in the morning. Obviously, it's not just for that minute, but, it's happening unless you're up really late, or on the, on the East Coast, right? Up super late or up super, super early, then it may not necessarily affect you, but, it might if you're in a different time zone. I don't know, maybe somebody's traveling, or I don't know if anybody watches my stuff that's further off, but, thought it was worth mentioning because my intuition kept telling me to mention it. So here we are. So let's just run through this really quickly. Again, we're looking at Venus in Leo and its opposition to Pluto, and it's only a 1 degree opposition, so I would say, yeah, we're still feeling that. And then I just want to kind of break this down, right? So we have the Venus in Leo, and that can feel like, again, that fiery, playful, kind of feel good, harmonious, relating type of energy at its best, right? At its best, when it's not being affected maybe by other things. And then we have the Aquarian vibe coming in with this conjunction between the moon and Pluto. And, I could see this playing out a bunch of different ways, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but let's just say that one of the options is that Pluto could be maybe kind of cold or distant as a form of gaining control or power in a situation, like gaining the upper hand. I could see that being like one of the ways in which this plays out. I just kind of want to paint a couple scenarios. And then we have the moon in the same sign, right? It's right next to and conjunct Pluto. And so that feeling of maybe moon in Aquarius feeling like wanting a lot of independence is one way, but also I could see it feeling just really distanced. And it being right next to Pluto like that, I could see it also feeling maybe a little bit salty, right? So I just wanted to mention that because, like, the moon, think about the moon and Pluto as being similar to the moon in Scorpio, right? Where it's like, it's uncomfortable, it's deep and intense, and both of them are in this kind of sign that typically wants to kind of maybe be out there and maybe not quite as close, or that kind of a thing. And so it might be bringing up pain around those types of themes, or just feeling deeply and intensely into that and wanting to not feel the intensity of that, wanting to distance oneself from that, especially because, we're looking at what it's distancing itself from, and that's Venus, right? So I could see that, like, feeling the gap between how far we are from what we want or who we want and how we want to be relating. But it doesn't necessarily have to be about somebody else. This could be about how far we are from just our own personal values, right? And I could also see this looking like, on a personal level, maybe shutting down, right? Just to not have to feel the intensity of it, or, again, shutting down in a way to, like, gain the upper hand if this is a dynamic that's interpersonal. But I could definitely see this being, like, just on a very personal level, maybe feeling some of that, like, this feels like too much. I need to, like, distance myself from this, or, like, what I want or how far I am from what I desire or what I value and what I'm reaching towards in life feels just like the gap feels like too much distance for me, right? So I could see it bringing up themes like that. So I don't want to really spend too much time on this. I just thought it was worth bringing up. I felt like maybe it was for somebody out there because it kept on coming up in my mind. So let's get on to the next one. Okay, so now we're looking at June 8th. And what we have here is an exact square to the north and south node with Venus. So here we have south node, north node, and Venus, and this exact square of 3 degrees with all of them, right? So we have, it looks like a T-square, but yeah, it's a square. It's squaring both of the nodes. And I was trying to think about, like, what's the best way I could describe the feeling as I'm feeling into this. And just imagine for a moment this wanting more, needing more, and also needing to let go and allow, right? That's like north and south node, right? This insatiable desire, north node, right? Insatiable desire to, like, have more, and knowing also that you cannot hold on, right? And that's what the south node is. It's like release, allowing, and not holding on, right? Now imagine into this we add the context of Venus and all of the Venus kinds of themes, right? Like your desires or your values or about your creative process. So imagine feeling this way, right? Being in this tug of war type of space between wanting or needing or desiring or having a hunger for more, and also knowing that you cannot hold on with both hands and you need to be able to allow and let go and release, right? And that can feel like this really irreconcilable place to be standing in between, this like place of unknowns, or this kind of place of purgatory, right? Because you just can't be in like just one or the other. So again, like imagine feeling like you're in this tug of war type of energy with your desires, with your values, with your creative process. And of course, the most obvious one to imagine is with love and relationships. And I do mean relationships of all kind, close relationships. But of course, you know, again, we tend to think of love with Venus more often than not. So that feeling of being in this space and how difficult that can be, how problematic that can be if you're someone who tends to be impulsive as well. So I would say, you know, just my best suggestion here is to, on this day, again, it's one of the ones where I would like mark my own calendar and kind of go, oh yeah, okay, June 8th, right? And we see like I have this for when it's exact, it's at 1:18 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, which is also Pacific Time, but you know, it's just where I happen to be. So, and adjust for wherever, but you'll probably be feeling this throughout the day, right? So my best suggestions would be to be observant, be as present and as grounded and as clear-headed as you can be on this particular day, right? So respond as needed to situations or desires that arise. And if you are going to take any kind of action, I would say make sure you've really checked in with yourself and that you're clear. Like, is this going to be kind of one of those things where you're like, uh-oh, I regret sending that text, or uh-oh, I regret doing that thing, or pushing things in this way or that, or and this is not just about pushing for what you want or like trying to grasp or hold on. This can also be about like that release place and just being like, oh, let it all go. It all goes to hell. Fuck it. So, there is this, teetering, and it almost looks like teetering on this like balance point, right? If you turn it on its head, and it looks like we're having having to kind of hold this liminal space of in-betweens, right? It's neither or, it's just in between. And so that can take an immense amount of, I think, presence and groundedness to stay clear-headed in this situation. So I just wanted to bring this up as well. And let's move on to, I think we just have 2 more to go through, and then we're all set for the first half of June. Okay, so I want to talk for a moment about the Venus-Jupiter square. So we have Jupiter and Venus squaring. I know that this says for June 11th, but this is actually, I just realized I didn't have the slide for this, so I'm just going to write it over here. So it's actually happening on June 10th, and that is for Venus squaring Jupiter. And it will be exact at 4, well, it won't be exact. It won't be exact until June 11th, but it'll be starting out where it'll be at the same degree at 4:02 p.m., and that's Pacific time. So just so you know, it's starting in the afternoon previous to June 11th on this date, but I just wanted to keep recording, so I'm going to talk about it because it's not actually going to be exact to the exact minute until June 11th anyways. So let's talk about it really quickly. So this is, 2 benefics squaring off, right? And I think here we can see that maybe the balance between pleasure and expansion is a little thrown off here, right? Like one way this could look is overindulging in a way that isn't really balanced or that isn't really aligned with what our actual desires are, or what our current value system or structure is, and kind of going beyond our means, right? It's the difference between enjoyment and gluttony, and that can look a lot of different ways. Think about all of the hedonistic things and them being on blast, right? And so, for instance, one example of that could be like overspending, right? And just overspending on things that are all about earthly pleasures, right? Like Venus is about that luxury, right? She wants all the finer things and all of that. And we also have Jupiter all about expansion and magnification and like, let's go big or go home. And it's in Venus's home of Taurus, which is also just like, yes, I want the finer things. I want all the things that feel good and look good and are awesome, right? So like them squaring off like this, it's kind of weird when 2 benefics are squaring off. In fact, I would love to hear how this shows up for other people because it's one of those ones where it just still glitches me. So, but we might want to ask ourselves, like for instance, in the shopping scenario, is this really what I value? Is this really what I want and what I value? Or am I going to have like a shopping hangover tomorrow, or look at my accounts and go, oh, oops, like that's actually hurting me more than it's helping me. So the other thing about this is that they're both in fixed signs, right? Leo is also a fixed sign, and so is Taurus. And so with fixed signs, sometimes when they're involved like this, it can be maybe some kind of stubbornness around like, I want what I want, consequences be damned, right? Just like some stubbornness digging the heels in around like, I'm gonna get this. And who knows, you might just go on and buy a couple things anyway and be like, oh, screw it, I'm just gonna buy it anyway. And then you find, 2 days later, a week later, you're like, oh, maybe that wasn't really a good idea, or it's not exactly what I wanted, or it's a little too whatever, and you want to get rid of it. So those are just some examples, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And again, that's happening. It's starting out like you'll be feeling that the afternoon of June 10th on the West Coast, right? Adjust for your time zone, but it won't be like exact until June 11th. And again, as I've said before, it's like the leading up to the exact point is when we're usually feeling that kind of pressurized intensity anyways with any of the aspects that we're talking about. So it's worth mentioning that it's happening the day before. Okay, so now let's get into the other stuff I really want to talk about for June 11th. And this is going to be our last day that we talk about. Here we are with one of those dips that I was talking about that Pluto was going to make back into Capricorn. So we've had it over here in just like the first few degrees over here of Aquarius, and now it has retrograded. It is retrograded back into Capricorn, and it'll be here for a few months. So we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, I'm assuming, at some point. I can't imagine why we wouldn't. But I mentioned this in the last video, so I thought it was worth mentioning here just so you know that it has happened now. And again, with themes like this have to do with power and our economic systems like currencies, banks, things like that, and also our societal structures. So I would look at, on a personal level, besides on what's happening on the world stage or the collective stage, I would look at what has maybe come up in the last, I know 15 years is a really long time to look over, but if you've noticed that there have been any overarching themes with your personal power and the structures in your life that have been impacted for your ultimate benefit through like some kind of transformation, like a pivotal moments or transformative processes, which I'm sure in a 15-year period we would all go through, and which is why I say it's like, even for me, it's a little bit hard to kind of look back and go, okay, like, well, what kinds of structures and things had to do with Capricorn and the energies of Capricorn and my own personal power in my life. And so I think if you can break it down that way, it's also easier to see like, well, what house does Capricorn occupy in your life? These are the numbers of the houses. So if you have your chart and you can see like where this has actually been happening for you, it'll give you a better idea of like what themes are coming up. Right? Again, like I used the seventh house before as an example in an earlier slide, and let's say that it's in the seventh house. Well, like what kinds of, maybe looking at the structure of relationships, maybe you've gone from open to a closed monogamous relationship or vice versa, and how has that impacted your personal power? Or were you experimenting with that maybe? And in that experimentation, you learned a lot about where you give your power away or how to reclaim your power in the wake of, any kind of messiness or things like that, right? So just to give you some examples of how that could look when we're able to get more specific about what those themes are, when we can see like, well, what house does it actually occupy, right? So just wanted to give that as an example. If you have questions about that, feel free to drop them or DM me or something like that. So anyway, just wanted to bring that up and say, hey, that's what's going on now. It'll be there for a few months and then it'll dip back into Aquarius really quickly, next year. I don't think it's going back and forth this year again. I think that's it for this year. I'll have to double check, and then it'll go back one more time and then it'll go firmly in to Aquarius, in 2024 and stay there for 20 years at a certain point. But this is one of those dips back that I was telling you about. So the other thing that we have going on, and I pulled this chart for like really, really early in the morning on Pacific Coast time. It says Mountain Standard Time, but it's the same right now as Pacific. So, and the reason I want to bring this up is because we have the moon conjunct at an exact degree with Neptune in Pisces, and talk about like some super dreamy energy, right? So obviously, unless you're up late, this is not really going to matter all that much for you if you're in the United States on like, let's say either of the coasts, right? It might be a little bit too early, but I would say, maybe once you wake up on this morning on June 11th, pay attention to what your dreams were before. I feel like they'll be informative and we could really like see maybe certain kinds of things that we need to feel into or see with our dreams. I always just think it's like really cool, the kinds of dreams that can come out when the astrology gets really watery like this, right? So just something, and it's all water. It's just water, 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 moon water, Pluto or Neptune water, Pisces water. It's just all water. So for those of you in other time zones that are further out, and this is happening actually during your sun day, like during the day, I could see this being quite lovely. Like it could be a lackadaisical kind of really super chill Sunday. It could also be a really creative day. So, I would say that maybe this would not be a day that is for like super analytical, logical type of work, but maybe more creative, artistic, more dreamy, more feeling into what I want to do, feelings guiding the way versus like logic guiding the way on this particular day. So I could see this being really lovely. I think if you tried to I'm not saying that you couldn't absolutely do analytical work on this day. I'm just saying it might not feel as easy. It might feel like there's a little cloudiness or a little kind of like fogginess over the window as you're peering into things, It might not obstruct your view completely, but you might have an easier time on a different day than on this particular day. So just wanted to mention those two things. And then the next slide is the last slide. It's also about June 11th, but it also shows what I want to look at last. So we are still on June 11th, but I wanted to show this because the other slide, because I had it so early in the morning, wasn't showing this. We have Mercury ingressing into its home sign of Gemini. So it's like, yay, finally somebody comes in to join the sun. I mean, Juno's been there, but I'm not talking about asteroids at this point. Like, it's just a lot. So, but like, somebody else joins the party of the Gemini party. And so here we could start to maybe get a little bit more of that kind of Gemini feel of like that social butterfly, kind of fun, light energy, maybe like more buzzing with communication and conversation type of thing. I think honestly in the next video that I do about the astrology for the second half of June, we'll be talking about the new moon in Gemini. And I feel like that new moon in Gemini is when we really kind of get more of that taste of that Gemini feeling. And it's like we're getting it at the tail end, right? So it's not like been going on this whole time, but having Mercury get into its home sign, I feel like that brings some kind of also like ease to our communication and our thinking processes and like the things that have to do with Mercury as well, again depending on what's happening in your own personal chart. So I thought it was worth definitely mentioning. I thought it would be remiss if I did not mention this. So we have a lot more going on around this, but I just think that this could be really nice. So that is it for everything that we have for the astrology for the first half of the month of June. Again, you guys, I'm experimenting with this, so I'm open to your constructive feedback and letting me know what you like, what you'd like more of, what works. And also, I just have some like tech limitations in terms of like how I can record this and what I can do for right now. So for the time being, it's going to be in this format until I can just like get certain tech things set up with like a double video, like me on video and me showing the charts and things like that. So this is just kind of like how it is. And I hope that this has been helpful and insightful and that you mark your calendars and put a little note. Like when I would listen to astrologers, and I still listen to astrologers. So, I would always take note of certain dates that kind of perked my ears up. And I was like, oh, okay. And I would just put that into a reminder on my phone and just go, oh, hey, themes around that such and such to like be aware of on this day that I wanted to be aware of. Like maybe I don't want to say the thing just now. Maybe I want to pause before I take that action. And then other days I would mark on my calendar because I was curious about how it would play out by the end of that day or the following day and be like, hey, how was it yesterday? So, if you're kind of like me in that respect where you like to kind of see or you like to have the forewarning because you're like, oh, thanks for the heads up. I will watch my mouth or my actions or what is going on this particular day or, that type of thing, then I hope that this was helpful in helping you plan the first half of the month. So I will get this out to you guys ASAP. I was hoping to have it out earlier than I'm getting it out, but I will get this to you as soon as possible, like right now. So have a lovely first half of June, and I will be back to see you in the next one.